Hello to everyone and welcome back into the channel for this week's review of The Swamp Thing, Episode 3, He Speaks. Now if you're new to the channel and how we do things here, this is how it goes. If you have not yet seen this particular episode, by all means go and watch the episode first and then come back, because we're going to deal heavily into spoilers. So with those formalities out of the way, let's get right into it. This week's opening scene presents us with an intriguing scenario. Alec appears to be his former self and is having an interaction, or more so being assaulted, by a man he killed in the prior episode's finale. However, one can interpret this interplay as a glimpse inside the mind of a man who has become something unrecognizable even unto himself. While viewing the pieces of the man who posed a threat to the young girl Susie just hours prior, as well as himself, it is very likely at his core the thing formerly known as Alec is grappling with his conscience, as well as his plight. But the darkness that has been rising as of late uses this opportunity to take form, just as the Swamp Thing departs the area. Abby and Liz discuss the events from the night before, and Abby tells Liz about a human being covered entirely in plant life, and that his name somehow is Alec. But duty literally calls, as the CDC summons her to the hospital. Now, although we are introduced to Dr. Jason Woodrue in the previous episode, Abby's initial acquaintance with him while examining Susie's father shows us a much more Darwinist side, or almost nihilistic worldview. This scene becomes a foreshadowing in a sense of the type of personality we're dealing with, and one that holds a much more underlying purpose for the show. Matt informs Lucilia of what transpired in the swamp the night before, as she scolds him on protocol and is still lit flame for Abby. And listen, I have to admit, if I didn't know any better, these two seem more like a husband and wife couple than a mother and son. Just an observation. Abby checks in on an unconscious Susie, who is finally returned to the hospital's care, when the nurse mentions Harlan. But when Abby checks in on Harlan, on cue, Harlan turns around in his chair and begins to convulse, throwing up some green stuff. Harlan has contracted the green flu, which causes Abby to borrow Liz's girlfriend's boat and search for answers. But out in the wood line of the swamp, the darkness strikes again, invading a hunter with a swarm of supernatural bugs. As it turns out, Jason Woodrue does have a heart after all, in the form of his wife Caroline, and while the two confer about the properties of the mutagen, Caroline is seen taking her meds, and then just a few moments later, forgets that she has already taken her meds. Yes, Caroline has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and is of course losing a bit of herself day by day. And of course, this is the motivation for Jason Woodrue's undertaking in the swamps of Marais. Because you know what they say, behind every great nihilist is a wife who will be caught in his wake.
You will not take her from me! Your anger and your lust for power have already done that.
We return to the Sunderland residence as Maria further reiterates her position with the loss of her daughter, just as Gordon Haas shows up uninvited. Now, due to a visit from Liz earlier in this episode, Gordon feels a bit threatened by the press that Liz could bring down on him by shedding light on him and Avery's covert dealings. But we know that Maria overhears their conversation. Later that night, Lucilia Cable pays Avery a visit due to her investigation of Alec Holland's disappearance. And it doesn't take long before Avery tries to soften her up, and it immediately becomes clear that the two themselves carried a flame in the past. So, perhaps Lucilia warning her son Matt about Abby is actually her projecting onto Matt by what happened between her and Avery. But upstairs in her daughter's bathroom, Maria sees a rotting apparition of Shauna, who only convinces Maria not to trust Avery's fidelity. And before the specter of Shauna leaves, the mirror splits, perhaps hinting towards Maria's psychological state. But once Shauna is gone, the mirror remains cracked. Abby arrives at Alec's abandoned laboratory and begins to read through his journals for anything he might have discovered that could cure the green flu. And in moments, memories begin to flood her mind of the bond they shared in such a short time and was gone before it could develop into something more. But when something crawls on her shoe, she ignores it until an unseen force disturbs the building. Then, right on time, the Swamp Thing burst up through the floor. And it's here that I'll point out. It is in these types of scenes where the show begins to deliver on those various elements that keep a viewer watching. The macabre nature balanced out with the relationship straight out of a soap opera is where this show stands out among fans. Now after the Swamp Thing and Swarm trade blows, the Swamp Thing grabs it and commands the darkness to release him. Though a bit uneasy by the Swamp Thing's appearance, Abby knows she's safe, and just like before in the stairwell, Alec reaches into her hair to remove some debris or bugs. Then the Swamp Thing gives her a vital piece of information that gives Abby all she needs to perhaps aid those infected. As soon as Abby arrives at the hospital, all of the affected patients are responding to the advent of the darkness being expelled from the host that attacked Abby. And based on what Alec or the Swamp Thing told her, she administers 2 dosages of medicine. Now, I'm not a doctor, but azathioprine is an immunosuppressive used to treat organ rejection in kidney transplant patients. Now, the other dosage, I have no clue. But the idea is to help those infected sort of assimilate the infection instead of combat it right out, causing it to pass through their systems. And based on Harlan's reaction to the treatment, it seems to have worked. Abby has a moment with Susie, and Maria sees through Avery's aims whether the insight is common sense or from the supernatural. In any case, she refuses to further aid Avery with his funding in the swamp. Abby ends up at Delroy's for some much-needed R&R and spends some time with Matt recapturing old times, which leads to sharing a dance. But the Swamp Thing is seen watching just outside the door. Madame Xanadu pays Daniel an unexpected visit to read his fortune, and unlike countless times before, something has shifted, hinting towards a greater role for him in the show. Liz's girlfriend finds some much-needed evidence pointing towards something much more deliberate to cause Alec to disappear. And finally, Avery, who was jaded by Gordon's visit earlier in this episode with an attempt to no longer fund Avery, have their outstanding debt canceled, so to speak, once and for all, as Liz is heard knocking on the door. Man, this episode, in my opinion, became a point in the series that showed this concept was far more competent than anyone thought possible, and I can't wait to see if it comes back from cancelization. Post your comments down below, let us know what you think. If you like this video, make it official, hit that like and sub button. For more content like this, join us next week for our Swamp Thing Saturday debut for the 4th episode. And until then, see you then.